She drove a red ATV straight through my wheat field like she was late for a suburban apocalypse, wearing a pastel pantsuit and Ray-Bans like HOA Barbie on a mission. She said she was patrolling for violations. I said she was trespassing. She said my bull was a public nuisance. The bull said nothing, but he did fart loud enough to spook her poodle. And that's when I knew this wasn't about property. It was about war. They say peace comes with retirement, but whoever said that never had to deal with an HOA Karen on a four-wheeler. I traded in 30 years as a federal land inspector for a quieter life at River Hollow Ranch, my family's 40-acre spread nestled between Juniper Hills and the newer subdivision called Elmsworth Heights, just outside Durango, Colorado. My days were simple: sunrise coffee, walking the wheat rows, and making sure my bull Chuck didn't bulldoze the fence again. That was before she arrived. On a crisp Tuesday morning in September, just 3 weeks before harvest, I heard a mechanical buzz tear through the morning air like a wasp with a grudge. A bright red ATV came barreling over the ridge, chewing up wheat like it had a personal vendetta against carbohydrates. The rider? A woman in a pastel pink pantsuit, aviators perched on her head like a crown, and a smug smile that said, "I don't care if this is your land, I have a clipboard." She pulled up 10 feet from me, killed the engine, and stepped off like she'd just arrived to inspect troops. "Good morning, Mr. Barnes," she said in a tone that could polish silver. "I'm conducting my weekly security patrol for the Elmsworth Heights HOA. Unfortunately, I observed several community violations on your property." And she held up a tablet stylus first, like it doubled as a scepter. I didn't say a word. Years in federal service teach you that silence unnerves bullies more than shouting ever could. She tapped her screen dramatically. "Your fencing exceeds residential height standards. 6 feet is the maximum. Your private property sign is confrontational and may cause psychological distress to residents. Your livestock creates persistent olfactory disturbances, and the presence of barbed wire constitutes a visual blight." I blinked. "Ma'am, this land isn't part of your HOA. This is River Hollow Ranch, registered as agricultural property since 1952. You're trespassing." Karen, because of course she was a Karen, didn't flinch. "Actually, Mr. Barnes, this old cattle trail qualifies as a public easement under State Code July 12-3. Any property that impacts shared community values falls under HOA purview." She said it with the confidence of someone who'd watched 3 YouTube videos and decided she was Judge Judy. I asked to see the easement documents. She waved vaguely and began snapping photos of my fences, my shed, even Chuck chewing cud like he was auditioning for court evidence. "Expect a notice within 48 hours. We'll work together to bring you into compliance. Cooperation is the cornerstone of community." With that, she revved her ATV and launched back into the wheat, leaving behind a bouquet of shredded stalks and tire prints deeper than my patience. Chuck let out a long moo that sounded suspiciously like he was mocking her departure. I watched her disappear over the hill and realized something chilling. She truly believed she had power here. Not just imagined authority, weaponized HOA. That afternoon, I drove to the county recorder's office, chewing on trail mix and my own irritation. 3 hours of digging through dusty surveys and topographical overlays confirmed what I already knew. No easement existed across my land. The cattle trail was just that, a trail my grandfather used to shuffle Angus from pasture to pasture, entirely within our boundary. But something else caught my eye in the development paperwork for Elmsworth Heights. The environmental assessment from 2002 specifically designated River Hollow Ranch as a non-developable green buffer zone to preserve local ecological integrity. Translation: my land was supposed to stay exactly as it was, untouched, unbothered, unhailed. But Karen didn't want a buffer. She wanted a blank canvas for her suburban empire. And I'd just become her first paint stroke. By the following Friday, I understood that Karen's ATV was just the opening act. What came next was a slow-burn psychological operation dressed in pastel professionalism and HOA letterhead. It started innocently enough: flyers tucked into mailboxes throughout Elmsworth Heights. Community Standards Workshop. Let's build a better neighborhood together. They featured stock photos of smiling couples planting flowers and playing catch with golden retrievers like a propaganda piece for Stepford life. But tucked between the clip art was a line that made my stomach turn. Discussion topic: incompatible agricultural activity and property value erosion adjacent to our community. I wasn't named, but everyone knew who that meant. subtle as a chainsaw in the library. I didn't attend a workshop, but my neighbor Leona Delaney did. Leona is 72, half blind, but sharper than a tack dipped in lemon juice. That night, she called me with an account so vivid I could smell the room. Karen had set up a PowerPoint, yes, a literal PowerPoint, with labeled photos of my property taken from various angles, including a drone shot that zoomed in on Chuck like he was a criminal suspect. And the slideshow was titled Mitchell Problem Zone. She pointed to my barn and implied it was a code violation waiting to happen, called the smell of my fertilizer a community disruption, and quoted fictional statistics about home devaluation due to adjacent farming operations. Then came the cherry on top. She suggested the HOA explore soft compliance measures like persistent community engagement and social awareness walks. Translation, weaponized neighbor gossip. Within days, her community walks began. Small groups, 3, maybe 5 people at first, would casually stroll along the edge of my property, standing just outside the fence line like tourists viewing exotic livestock. One guy even brought binoculars. They'd murmur about how someone should do something or how this could be a lovely dog park. Karen led them like a suburban Moses, wielding her tablet like a modern-day stone tap. One woman in Lululemon leggings asked loudly, "Do cows even need that much space?" Chuck snorted so hard he startled a squirrel out of a cedar. I stayed silent, arms crossed, watching from the porch with a coffee cup and a camera. And every time they came back, the groups grew bigger, like her HOA mind virus was spreading. What twisted the knife was how Karen manipulated the narrative. At the next HOA bulletin, she published a community impact report that painted my land as the leading cause of neighborhood anxiety, noise disturbances, and aesthetic dissonance. Her words, not mine. There was even a survey, probably filled out by her tennis club friends, suggesting that converting my property into a multi-use wellness space would raise home values by 18%. I knew what she was doing. In federal enforcement, we called this a perception war. Make someone seem like the problem long enough and the crowd won't question the solution. And just when I thought she'd peaked, Karen pulled out her ace. She began citing me officially. A violation letter arrived by courier, complete with embossed HOA letterhead and a citation number that looked official but didn't match any county system. The offense? Unauthorized industrial storage unit. She meant my equipment shed. Another letter followed. Livestock-induced environmental stressor. Chuck apparently was now a biohazard. That was the moment I realized she wasn't just trying to irritate me. She was setting the stage for something bigger. This wasn't about fences or fertilizer. It was about erasing my farm entirely. And soon, she'd make her first move that crossed the line from harassment into sabotage. I thought I'd seen bureaucratic warfare during my years with the Federal Land Bureau. But Karen? She weaponized paperwork like it was an Olympic sport. The week after she accused my bull of being an environmental threat, the violation letters came faster than pizza coupons. Every morning, my mailbox bulged with thick envelopes bearing HOA seals, legal-sounding headers, and an overuse of the word compliant. I started stacking them like trading cards. Fence height nonconformity, unauthorized agricultural machinery, hostile signage affecting community harmony, and my personal favorite, visual aggression via unapproved color palette. Apparently, my red barn was now psychologically damaging to nearby residents. Who knew barn red was the new menace? She wasn't just flooding me with notices. Karen escalated to bringing in outsiders. One morning, a silver Prius with a county seal on the side pulled up while I was feeding the chickens. Out stepped a man in khakis and a clipboard who introduced himself as a licensed odor specialist. I honestly thought he was joking. He wasn't. There's been a report of methane anomalies and olfactory disturbances emanating from your livestock enclosures, he said, wrinkling his nose for effect. The man walked around holding what looked like a glorified lint roller with a sensor taped to the end. He waved it near Chuck, who promptly sneezed on him. "You'll receive findings in 10-12 business days," he said before peeling away down the dirt road like he just cracked a major cartel case. That wasn't the last visit either. Next came the Department of Environmental Quality, triggered by an anonymous complaint alleging my farm was leaching nitrates into the neighborhood's groundwater. The official was polite, even embarrassed, as he walked the perimeter and reviewed my water runoff logs. After 2 hours, he apologized. "Honestly, Mr. Barnes, you're more compliant than half the organic farms I've certified." He paused. But between us, this complaint, it reads like it was written by someone with a law degree and a grudge. That someone didn't even bother hiding anymore. 2 days later, I received a certified letter stamped with HOA legal counsel insignia, citing me for causing psychological duress to community members through continued nonconformity with Elmsworth Heights aesthetic values. That's not satire. That's a real sentence someone typed, probably while drinking kombucha. By this point, Karen had mobilized the full Karenverse. HOA officers, code inspectors, and even a local mediator named Brent, who showed up on my porch one morning wearing a linen blazer and asking if we could explore a path toward mutual coexistence. I told Brent that mutual coexistence didn't involve forged easement claims and weaponized odor detectors. He left with a flyer titled "Dealing with Difficult Neighbors" and a look of deep regret. But Karen wasn't aiming for actual resolution. No, this was psychological attrition. The more she buried me in fake violations and pointless inspections, the more she hoped I'd crack, throw in the towel, and sell. What she didn't realize was that while she was playing checkers in a floral pantsuit, I'd spent 3 decades playing chess with land developers twice as nasty. I wasn't going anywhere. But what I didn't expect was how far she'd go next. Because the following Monday, before I'd even finished my coffee, a drone buzzed over my barn roof. This time not for pictures. This time, it dropped something, and what it left behind changed the whole game. At first, I thought the drone had just been a flashy escalation in Karen's ongoing HOA theater, maybe another amateur aerial inspection to bolster her next bogus violation letter. But when I walked out to the barn and saw what it had dropped, my stomach tightened like a coiled wire. It was a laminated flyer, weighted with 2 metal washers, fluttering slightly in the breeze. On it in full color was a photoshopped image of my wheat field, overlaid with the words, "This land could be so much more." Below that, a mock rendering of a golf course clubhouse, complete with valet circle and juice bar. And at the bottom, "Coming soon, Elmsworth Commons, a vision of progress." No signature, no contact info, just intent. It wasn't marketing, it was a message. This was no longer about HOA violations. This was about removing me. The next morning brought the final insult. I rose early, same as always, ready to inspect the wheat that had almost reached full golden bloom. But when I crested the ridge and looked down at the eastern plot, my breath caught mid-step. Someone had driven an ATV through my crop during the night. Hard, deliberate lines carved deep into the field. From ground level, it looked like random destruction, but from above, the track spelled out 2 words in block letters that stretched nearly 30 yards wide: "Move out." My heart pounded, not from rage, but from the sheer gall. 3 months of labor, seed, fertilizer, and care reduced to a vandal's billboard. Chuck stood by the fence, his head tilted, as if even he was confused by the audacity. I snapped photos, called the sheriff's office, and filed a report. The deputy was sympathetic but honest. "Hard to prove who did it unless you have a plate or camera footage," he said. "But we've had a few calls about a red ATV speeding through public trails at night. I didn't have a plate, but I had a suspicion, and it wore past stealth." Exactly 1 hour after the report was filed, a caravan of SUVs and sedans rolled up to the edge of my property. Out stepped Karen, dressed like she was headed to a campaign rally, followed by a small camera crew, a photographer, and 2 reporters from the local paper. She waved to the camera as if hosting a cooking segment and stood directly in front of the ruined field. "This is why we need stronger neighborhood standards," she announced. "When one landowner refuses to respect the community, it leads to tension, chaos, and division." She gestured behind her like Vanna White revealing the final puzzle. The destroyed wheat? To her, it was a prop. To me, it was proof of war. I didn't confront her, not yet. I watched from my porch with my arms crossed and my blood boiling. She wasn't just playing dirty now, she was staging a show. A false narrative broadcast to the neighborhood. Richard Barnes, the unreasonable farmer, ruining our peace. The reporters asked questions laced with Karen's rhetoric. How has the community coped with the disruptions? And what's the next step to reclaim harmony? She smiled for every flash. And as she spoke about long overdue land reform, one of the cameras panned just for a second to the smirk twitching at the corner of her mouth. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, the photos of my ruined crop splayed beside my old government-issued laptop. I hadn't logged into the Bureau system in years, but my consultancy credentials were still active. And as I pulled up parcel maps and federal land records, I found something buried in the archives, something that made my hands freeze over the keyboard. Karen had made a critical mistake. The land she wanted to sell didn't legally belong to her, and she knew it. The thing about federal land records is they never forget. Buried under layers of bureaucracy and acronyms, only 3 people in the country truly understand. They contain the kind of mistakes that ruin careers, or in Karen's case, expose them. At first, I was just chasing a hunch, but the deeper I clicked, the more my screen lit up with smoking guns. The subdivision known as Elmsworth Heights sat on land that had once been part of a disputed federal tract, a parcel that had been misclassified in 1978 during a rushed state-to-federal transfer. Normally, that would have been sorted out years ago. But someone had quietly closed the file in 2004, the name on the last amendment. Karen Delacroix, acting as legal consultant for something called Granite West Holdings. My wheat field, the one she'd tried to convert into her own personal HOA trophy case, was never meant to be part of that development. In fact, the original environmental study filed before Elmsworth Heights was even built had clearly designated River Hollow Ranch as a permanent green buffer, intended to protect the watershed running under my lower pasture. The study warned that development would threaten aquifer stability and wildlife migration paths, but Karen had submitted an updated environmental report in 2021 with several pages digitally altered and conveniently omitting the section about protected land status. Her name was in the metadata. I hadn't found a power-trapping neighbor. I'd found a real estate scam artist in designer flats. Then came the hammer blow, a scanned PDF tucked inside a folder marked Pending Acquisitions. It was a sales agreement between Granite West Holdings and Elmsworth Heights HOA, signed just 6 weeks prior, for the strategic repurposing and redevelopment of 60 acres, including my ranch. The price tag? $3,800,000, 0 cents. The contract was signed by HOA chairwoman Karen Delacroix and included a parcel number that matched my land exactly. She wasn't just harassing me to get me out. She was pre-selling my property like it was already hers. And it got worse. Among the attached documents was a confidential memo referencing a legacy waste mitigation concern beneath Section D, which just so happened to be the eastern side of my farm. That memo changed everything. Karen wasn't after my land just for tennis courts and walking trails. She needed it to cover up a chemical disposal site, one that had never been disclosed and one that would cost millions in cleanup if discovered. I knew that trick. I'd seen developers do it back in Nevada. Bury the mess, bulldoze the evidence, build something pretty on top, and hope no one ever dug too deep. Except this time, the pretty thing was supposed to be a spa and golf course called Ellensworth Commons, and I was the last obstacle standing between her and the ribbon cutting. I leaned back in my chair, heart thudding with a mix of adrenaline and disbelief. Karen had graduated from HOA nuisance to white-collar criminal in the span of 3 folders. But I also knew something else. To bring her down, I couldn't just have suspicion. I needed allies, witnesses, records. And I needed to move before she did something worse than ruining my crop. So I picked up the phone and called the one person who knew every HOA regulation better than Karen did and hated her even more. Her name was Jackie. Her last name used to be Delacroix, and she had stories to tell. Jackie Delacroix answered on the second ring, her voice low and cautious, like someone who'd been waiting years for the call to finally come. "If this is about Karen," she said before I even introduced myself, "I'm in." She wasn't being dramatic. Jackie had once been Karen's sister-in-law, a former HOA board member herself, until Karen orchestrated a coup that ended with Jackie being fined for unauthorized flower pot arrangements and ousted from the board for failing to maintain HOA decor. Translation: she questioned Karen's decisions one too many times. "I've kept every email, every memo, every dirty little power grab she pulled," Jackie said, "because I knew one day someone would want receipts." That day had arrived. She wasn't alone. Word spread faster than fertilizer on wet soil once Jackie started reaching out to former HOA members and fed-up residents. That's how I met Tommy Rivera, a soft-spoken systems engineer who had been managing Elmsworth's HOA website and back-end systems for years, until Karen locked him out without notice and replaced him with her nephew, who once got a B- in computer class. Tommy had quietly copied the server logs before he was booted. She's been altering vote results, he told me, eyes wide with a mix of rage and vindication, changing poll outcomes, faking quorum numbers, even assigning votes to people who'd moved away. He handed me a flash drive. And if that's not enough, I found an unauthorized shadow database labeled HOA Strategy folder. The contents: legal templates, fake violation templates, and a spreadsheet titled Pressure Tracker with homeowners' names, resistance levels, and pressure scores from 1 to 10. I nearly choked on my coffee. Then came Patricia Elwood, a retired court reporter who lived 2 blocks from me and looked like a kindly librarian, because she was. But behind the knit cardigans and sensible shoes was a woman who'd recorded over 60 hours of HOA meetings using a digital pen recorder she bought from QVC just for fun. When I showed her the photos of my ruined wheat and the drone flyer, she pushed her glasses up, reached into a drawer, and pulled out a labeled binder. I've been documenting her intimidation techniques for over a year, she said. Here's where she threatens the Jenkins family over Christmas lights. Here's when she implied Mrs. Lou had too many guests for a dinner party. And here, she flipped to a tab marked illegal votes, is when she approved funding for a land assessment study without full board consent. She even had time spans. I was floored. Together, we formed what Tommy jokingly dubbed the HOA Underground. Not quite rebels in a basement, but pretty close, just with more pie and less camo. Jackie became the strategist, Patricia the archivist, Tommy the digital wizard. Me, I was the guy with federal clearance, a background in land law, and now motive. We started meeting in my barn, far away from HOA community surveillance cameras. Jackie shared copies of Karen's emails, where she casually referenced greasing the wheels with the county and streamlining opposition via procedural noise. It was all coded but painfully transparent. Karen hadn't just bent the system, she'd remolded it into her own HOA monarchy. But it was Tommy's discovery that truly sealed it. One evening, as we reviewed the server backups, he stumbled upon an encrypted folder titled GW_contract. Inside were drafts of the $3,800,000 0 cents land sale, annotated by Karen herself. One comment in the margin said, "Remove buffer zone language before board review could raise questions." That's when we knew she wasn't just unethical, she was criminal. The question now wasn't if we had enough evidence to stop her. The question was how to make it public, so loudly and so undeniably that not even Karen could spin her way out of it. And thanks to Jackie, we had just the plan. Jackie's plan was simple, brutal, and beautiful. Karen had scheduled a special HOA community forum for the upcoming Saturday morning at the Elmsworth Heights Clubhouse, complete with catered brunch, floral centerpieces, and an invitation so self-congratulatory it practically curtsied. Be a part of Elmsworth's future, it read, unveiling our exciting new development partnership to uplift the entire community. What Karen didn't know was that we were planning an unveiling of our own. In less than a week, we gathered enough evidence to choke a grand jury. Emails, bank transfers, forged signatures, environmental violations, and the cherry on top, her drone footage file, mistakenly uploaded to a public folder Tommy uncovered. Turns out, HOA Karen had been recording more than meetings. She'd captured her own ATV tracks through my wheat field from drone angle, complete with timestamp. Poetic, really. The morning of the meeting, I walked into the clubhouse wearing a flannel shirt, jeans, and an old government-issued badge clipped to my belt. Not for authority, just for symbolism. Jackie wore a navy blazer and the kind of look that could melt acrylic nails. Patricia rolled in with her infamous 3-ring binder labeled KD, Control and Corruption. Tommy carried a laptop and a portable projector under one arm, his eyes gleaming with quiet vengeance. We weren't here for a scuffle, we came for a reckoning. The room was packed, at least 150 residents, some sipping mimosas, others chatting about property values and the rumored golf course. Karen swept into the room like she was being inaugurated in a powder blue pantsuit, hair coiffed within an inch of its life, and a smile surgically affixed to her face. "Good morning, everyone," she sang, stepping to the podium beside a massive screen already displaying the first slide, a glamorous rendering of Elmsworth Commons, your future begins here. In her speech with textbook HOA fluff, community, vision, investment, quality of life, then she hit the big sell. We've secured a multi-million-dollar partnership with Granite West Holdings to transform underutilized land, including the Eastern Green Buffer, into an oasis of wellness, leisure, and economic opportunity. She clicked the next slide. It was my farm, labeled as Redevelopment Zone Alpha. And that's when David stood up. We hadn't heard from him in weeks, but there he was, Karen's ex-brother-in-law, holding a folder thick with printouts. "Excuse me, Karen," he said calmly, "but before we all toast to this so-called vision, maybe you'd like to explain why you forged my signature on the sale agreement." A hush fell across the room. Karen's smile cracked like old paint. "David," she said through clenched teeth, "this isn't the time for—" But David walked to the front and laid the folder on the podium. "You forged my name, used my title as co-trustee of the HOA Trust Fund, and committed to a sale without any legal right to do so, and I have proof." The crowd erupted in gasps. Karen tried to pivot, waving him off as confused and emotional, but Jackie was already plugging Tommy's laptop into the projector. The HOA screen flickered once, twice, then switched from architectural renderings to a full dossier of evidence: video of Karen's ATV damaging my wheat field, annotated documents from the Granite West deal, audio clips from HOA meetings where she threatened dissenters with fines and retaliation. Then came Patricia's favorite clip, Karen saying, "If we can't get Barnes to sell, we'll citation him into bankruptcy." People started shouting. One woman stood up holding her phone, filming. Another yelled, "She fined me $200, 0 cents for drying clothes on a Tuesday." A man in the back yelled, "You told me my daughter's lemonade stand was a zoning hazard." The room devolved into what can only be described as democracy in rage mode. Karen tried to shout over the noise, but her voice was swallowed whole. That's when I stepped forward. "My name is Richard Barnes," I said, loud and clear as the room fell quiet. "I worked for the Federal Land Management Bureau for 30 years. What you've just seen isn't just unethical, it's illegal. Miss Delacroix has conspired to sell federally protected land, falsified records, and violated multiple state and federal statutes. And thanks to this community's brave members, we've compiled a case strong enough that federal investigators are already watching." Q Agent Sarah Chen, dressed in business casual and seated quietly in the third row, she rose and flipped her badge. "Karen Delacroix," she said in a voice that could stop traffic, "you are under federal investigation for wire fraud, conspiracy, environmental violations, and abuse of administrative power. I recommend you consult legal counsel immediately." Karen stared blankly, lips parted, mascara trembling. The board voted on the spot to suspend her indefinitely. The crowd cheered as she was escorted out, still protesting, still spinning her lies, but now with no podium, no microphone, and no power. As she passed me, she hissed, "This was my community." I leaned in and replied, "No, Karen, you just rented it. We're taking it back." Karen Delacroix was never formally handcuffed in front of the HOA clubhouse, but she might as well have been. Her exit, clutching her leather portfolio like it held her remaining dignity, stilettos clicking across the tile floor while half the room filmed her with their phones, became local legend. The next day, her picture was on the front page of the Durango Post, captioned, "HOA Queen Dethroned," and by Monday, federal agents had executed warrants at her home, her office, and the headquarters of Granite West Holdings. The shock waves rattled more than just Elmsworth Heights. Her scheme wasn't isolated. It was a template copied and deployed across at least 3 other communities in the Four Corners region, each with HOA boards quietly bullied or bought, each with redevelopment proposals hiding toxic footprints. Karen's arrest made national headlines when the environmental violations came to light. Turns out the undeveloped parcels she planned to sell sat on a long-buried industrial waste dumping site. Chemicals from an old refrigeration plant that closed in the 80s. That's why she needed my farm. Not because it was ugly, because it was clean. A pristine green sheet to spread over a poisoned history. Once exposed, the Granite West project collapsed. Their executives were charged with conspiracy and bribery. Their investors fled. And the only oasis built on that land was a temporary fence and several hazmat tents. The community, shaken but galvanized, held a formal vote 2 weeks later. Jackie was elected HOA chairwoman by a landslide, 123-4. Her first act was to dissolve every Caranier regulation except those related to actual safety. Gone were the rules about mailbox colors, seasonal wreath limits, and the infamous unapproved curtain opacity clause. The HOA budget, previously bloated with Karen's consulting fees, surveillance systems, and catered meetings, was trimmed by 60%. Residents voted to redirect those funds toward things that actually mattered: sidewalk repairs, school supply drives, and a neighborhood garden that now grows everything from heirloom tomatoes to purple carrots. Chuck, my bull, has his own painted tile near the garden gate. It reads, "No bull allowed except this one." We didn't just fix what Karen broke, we rebuilt something better. Patricia Elwood was made the official community historian. Her binders digitized and archived on the HOA's new transparent website. Tommy became the HOA's technology officer, implementing a voting system where every major decision required 70% quorum and real-time vote verification. David, Karen's ex-brother-in-law, now runs monthly homeowner forums where residents discuss proposals face-to-face over coffee instead of citations. Elmsworth Heights finally became what it claimed to be: a community. As for me, I never wanted the spotlight, but it found me anyway. I've since been invited to speak at town halls, property law classes, and even one national HOA conference, though I declined that last one. Too many lanyards and not enough accountability. But I do host weekend workshops at River Hollow Ranch now. We call them Farming and Freedom Saturdays. We talk about soil pH, neighborly boundaries, and how to spot a fraudulent HOA fine from 100 yards away. People come from all over Colorado and a few from out of state to walk the same wheat fields Karen once tried to pave over, the same field that, after being replanted, gave me the best harvest in 26 years. Enough to donate 10% to the food bank and start a scholarship fund for local students interested in agriculture or environmental law. We called it the Chuck Grant. He's still alive and well, by the way. Local legend, kids bring him carrots like he's a sacred cow. One of them even asked if we could make him mayor. But the legacy isn't just mine. It belongs to everyone who stood up. To Jackie for refusing to be silenced. To Tommy for exposing the digital lies. To Patricia for documenting the corruption when no one else noticed. And to the residents of Elmsworth Heights who learned that apathy is expensive, but courage is contagious. And sometimes justice arrives, not with sirens, but with binders, USB drives, and a bull named Chuck. 4 months after Karen's sentencing, 12 years in federal prison, restitution fines totaling over $750,000, 0 cents, and a permanent ban from any HOA leadership role, I received a letter. It was handwritten, the envelope thick and oddly formal. It came from a law school in Boulder. They were requesting permission to use the River Hollow case in their property law curriculum, not as a cautionary tale, but as an example of grassroots resistance against organized legal abuse. I gave them full permission, but I made one request: include the part about the wheat field and the drone and the sign that still hangs over the gate to my ranch that reads, "Mitchell Family Farm at 1952, protected by law, integrity, and one very stubborn bull." Because in the end, that's what this story really was. Not just a takedown of a corrupt Karen, but the rising of a neighborhood that remembered what it meant to be a community. And the best part, she didn't just lose. She became what every HOA tyrant fears the most: a case study, a meme, a cautionary bumper sticker on every mailbox she once tried to control. And me? I'm still here. Still farming, still watching the fence, still sipping coffee from my porch as the sun hits the golden tops of my wheat. But every once in a while, when a new family moves into Elmsworth and asks about the story, I smile and say, "Let me tell you about the time a HOA Karen tried to evict a bull and got trampled by the truth instead." Justice doesn't always come in a courtroom. Sometimes it grows in a wheat field, walks on 4 legs, and moves at tyranny. What happened in Elmsworth Heights is more than a story about a corrupt HOA Karen. It's a reminder that silence is never surrendered, and that even the most isolated underdog can inspire a community to rise. When power is abused behind flowery language and fake authority, the most effective weapon is knowledge and the courage to use it. From binders to bullhorns and bulls, this story proves that no one is untouchable when the truth has receipts, allies, and persistence. So if you've ever felt bullied by bureaucracy or steamrolled by someone with a clipboard and too much free time, remember you're not alone and you're not powerless. Share this story, comment with your HOA nightmare, and hit like if you believe communities belong to people, not paperwork. Let's keep exposing Karens, one HOA at a time.